The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, welcome everyone to today's Title Topics webinar. These are ALCA's free presentations we offer every month on issues important to title professionals. I'm Jeremy Yowie, Alta's Vice President of Communications, and we've got a great webinar lined up to help you cultivate a successful remote team. Working from home, as many of you have probably learned quickly, many new challenges, juggling work and possibly helping kids with online education and learning maybe new software and conference programs and just managing files at home. Today's content is definitely of interest. We've had over 1,000 people register, and as you can see, we've got our webcams turned on to make the presentation a little bit more personable. Pardon my hair. I haven't had a haircut since February. I'm typically wearing it. Before we get into the conversation, I just need to touch on a few housekeeping items. You can access a copy of today's presentation from the GoToWebinar handout section. The speakers got a chock full of information in the handout there in the presentation. They also got some other resources you can download. There's a checklist to help you get started with your remote team plan, as well as some fun door hangers that you can use when you're on a Zoom meeting. All participant lines are muted for this presentation. If you have a question, submit them in the questions box. We'll hold a little bit of time for Q&A at the end of the presentation. I do need to thank FNF Family of Companies for sponsoring our Title Topics webinars this year. Their support allows us to continue offering these educational opportunities free of charge. And with that out of the way, let me briefly introduce today's speakers. Joining us today, we have Tammy Strickland. Tammy is Vice President of Digital Transformation for Fidelity National Financial. And also joining us is Andrew Acker. Andrew is the Chief Operating Officer for dBello, which specializes in providing a remote title production workforce. And it was interesting as we were preparing for today's presentation. Tammy pointed out that she's a fringe baby boomer, while Andrew is a millennial. So they'll be offering insight from two different perspectives and experience in the industry. But the point, simply is that no matter your age, your staff can be successful if there's a plan. So we'll walk through that plan, and Tammy, I'll turn the presentation over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today. As Jeremy said, I'm Tammy Strickland. I really feel privileged to have this opportunity to present to you. My remote working goes back to 2004. And in 2004, my teams were no longer co-located with me. They were located across the United States. And in 2008, I also became a remote employee 100%. So over the past decade, we've learned to work in airplanes, in hotels, cafes, our customer sites, our operations, and our homes, but we've not been in traditional offices. And a part of the framework that I'm going to share today is how we have yet met every single goal that's been given to us from our organizations to make sure, even as remote teams, that we were contributing. We also are going to take today and look at the focus of giving you information that's going to be things that you can use now in a crisis. And then we've got some information that would be for longer term remote workforce.
Yeah, and I'm Andrew Acker. I'm excited for another chance to talk to a screen. All joking aside, I'm excited to be able to do this, especially right now in the current environment. I've been working in remote environments my entire career. Prior to 7 years with dBello, I spent 5 years at a consulting firm that was working in clients' offices and all across just remote locations in Southern California. Since joining dBello, that's been taken to conferences, airplanes, and all across the globe as we manage over 300 remote employees that make up our title production workforce. So while we might not love the circumstances right now, we do love the value of remote teams and hope you'll feel the same after this webinar. So with that, we'll jump right into the content today. We only have an hour of time, less than that now, and we want to help make the most of it to maximize the takeaways and give you a roadmap of kind of where we're going here for these next 45 minutes or so, just so we can spur some good discussion and get some good questions from the audience here. So really simply, we'll recap where we are now, how we make the most of it, and as Tammy mentioned, how to implement new solutions for the immediate and the long term as this becomes kind of the expected environment. So especially as states and companies are getting more familiar with remote settings, I know Alta is preparing another webinar kind of at the end of this month for how do we reopen. This is going to be a part of it, whether it's a hybrid or some employees work better at home or some employees don't feel comfortable coming to the office. So we're hopefully going to be able to touch on how to marry all those points together and give you guys a great framework to work from home for your company as well as personally for you. So let's jump into what some of this forced change looks like. And first and foremost, at this point now, a month in, some of these changes and challenges might not be new, but it's critical to recognize that we are not alone. It's not a new normal. It's difficult, it's draining, and what other verbs or expletives you want to use to describe it. It's also a huge opportunity. So let's dive in and look at what some of these challenges are. We can kind of share in that together. Unless you're an attorney, which I know there's probably some in attendance, when I get a terms and conditions agreement on an iPhone app or on a website, we all just click it and check the box. And it never feels like it affects us until it's something we feel like we didn't have control over. No matter what it is, we like choice and we like control. So being told we have to do something that causes a huge disruption to our routines and our daily lives isn't always easy. Further, some people still don't want to accept it. And the real challenge with that is when we continue to put up walls to it, we miss the opportunities for good that comes in it. And I know there has been pain and loss and challenges in this environment, but I truly believe good will come out of it in the way we support each other and the way we build up our companies. And ignoring those facts doesn't change the reality. One of my favorite quotes from Jim Collins in his book, Good to Great, is the story of the Stockdale paradox. And I think Jeremy will go to this quote on the next slide. And what it's really going to show is that the key to success is not just hopeful optimism, but rather it's a blunt recognition of the obstacles and the brutal facts that are in our way, along with that determination to prevail. And I think being here is a true sign that you're in this, you're committed, and you want to see success at the end. So what are we looking at as far as the difficulties? You know, the first and foremost is we don't have controlled circumstances, right? I am a control freak. I want to be able to manipulate, change, problem solve my way out of anything. The difficulty is, right, we can't control the schools, can't control the laws, we can't control the fear, but we can control how we respond. And that will really be the most important thing, especially as a leader. That's the only thing we can do for our team members, ourselves, our families as we're working at home, and we have all sorts of new obstacles there. There is just a shift in expectation, and it's going to be important to recognize now that our environments are changing too, right? Our home office is different and challenging, and some of these short-term challenges require extending grace to people and grace to teams. I was on a Zoom call, one of many that we're all having, with Wayne Stanley, and he taglined my office as the quarantine mullet. I have business up front and baby in the back as I'm working in my soon-to-be daughter's nursery. So it is a different environment for everyone. And I think, you know, the real challenge in that as leaders is there is no clarity of when it's going to end. We like to set goals and have plans. You know, we know the end of the month comes, the end of the month, and we have to reconcile and we have to finish out volumes and hit our marks. But when we look at forced changes, the hardest part is the unknown. So when we look at this next slide, we see that there is humor in recognizing that, but there is also the reality that there is some mental fatigue. And I trust that I'm not alone in that, right? Leaders are uniquely gifted, I believe, to problem solve. And that is a skill that becomes valuable in moments of chaos. However, for me, after that adrenaline rush kind of subsides, we're stuck now with this reality of I have to rebuild my business model and I have to restart how that gets done. So it is hard to accept it, but it's important to recognize those brutal facts so we can now adjust how we respond and come up with the plan to fix that. So from here, I'll hand it off to Tammy to take us through how we go from Corona chaos to the proven framework for remote teams.
Great. We're going to look at a framework that I bet most of this you're doing, your employees are probably doing most of it as well, but we're going to look at it as a framework that was developed over the past decade. I've had the opportunity to teach this with different organizations, and so this was taken from other organizations as well as developing my own teams. And we really have found that there's a few key factors that can make success for remote working. So we're going to start with looking at the employees and having what we're doing from employees and managers. From a manager standpoint, the Gallup poll that was recently just done said that because we're working from home, that 59% would like to continue to work from home, 41% would like to return to the office. Inclusive in that 41% were those who simply didn't have an adequate environment to be able to work from home. They may have small children at home or don't have a separate workspace, and they would like to return to the office. But either way that we look at this at a 60% rate, in order for us to be competitive and be able to do the things that we need to do as an industry, it probably is, this is a blessing in disguise that we would be able to take this time and craft something from working at home. So if we move on, let's look at the employees. And the first thing that we're going to talk about with employees, Jeremy, we'll go one slide up, is that most employees that are successful remote employees are also your ones that are successful in your office. We have people who are self-motivated, independent. We want to make sure that they're willing to do the work at home. We want to make sure that they can do the work without a great deal of supervision. They have a great work ethic. They're highly responsive. It's not a time that we want, or our customers, to chase down our employees at home. We need to have set times where we're responding to emails, texts, or phone calls. They're very resourceful. There is no longer the IT department down the hall to help you. So you have to have employees that don't have quit in them. They're willing to see it through when there are things that they need to solve on their own. And then as managers, we need to make sure that we keep them collaborative. We don't want our employees to become just task employee based. We want them to understand what their colleagues are doing and being able to contribute on a part of that. So truly, the qualities that we need in successful remote employees are the qualities that we need when we have them in our office. So if we have a business model that we're in, and we'll flip one, Jeremy, that we have an opportunity that we have people who are coming into the office and they're essentially not performing unless they are in our offices, the reality is that we have somebody who is probably a high contributor, a manager, someone who could really be contributing to our business, that's there to monitor those that are having performance issues. And that becomes a very expensive business model. So how do we, either remote or in office, begin to change that business model, begin to change the acceptance that we have to have people in the office in order to monitor them? What we would do is begin to coach and train. And we're going to coach and train to ensure that we're able to move it one forward, please, Jeremy. We're going to coach and train to make sure that we begin to instill the qualities that we need in our teams. I think the most important thing is make sure that you've got employees that are very qualified to be able to do their jobs remotely. They've been trained and to do that. And then we've set a framework wherein that they become accountable for the self-discipline, the motivation, all of those sort of things. And we'll show how we create that framework where we help our employees be accountable. It is very rare that you have the employee that is just tremendous in the office but can't work remotely. That is a rarity, because it is usually the fact that if you're self-disciplined and motivated in doing those things in the office, you're doing those things when you work remotely. One of the things that I think becomes very important is a mindset between the managers and the employees, because working remote does bring up some different factors. And one of my mindsets is the fact that if you're a remote worker, you have a greater responsibility to document your work, to be available and to share your status. It just is. It is not that we're micromanaging. It's just that there is a greater responsibility. I think that a part of that greater responsibility is the recognition and the willingness to be accountable and to recognize that working remote and being successful working remote is almost a mindset of a contractor. We're going to document what we've done, document our contributions, document our efforts, and be able to share that in a status so that we don't become invisible being a remote employee. We'll do the next slide, please, Jeremy. So what really becomes the price of admission when I have someone who is becoming remote and I offer that this may also work for you? One of the price of admission is that a salary that I've accepted from an organization says that normally it's a 40-hour work week. So I've committed to a 40-hour work week in order to get that salary. As a part of that, then I expected have somebody working 40 hours. Working remotely doesn't mean that we're working part-time. And one of the things that I've done most of the time we run out of hours before tasks. But if there is a possibility that somebody isn't going to need their entire 40 hours to do a project this week, we had something that was just called important but not urgent. And it was a list of things that we wanted to do, maybe contact our customers, maybe check on documents, the things that were very important to be done but didn't have a time frame. We would have that list working so that if for some reason that someone had a 37-hour week, they could contribute 3 hours to our important but not urgent list. So that was one of the things that we did in order to make sure that we upheld that 40-hour minimum. The organization may also ask you to present results differently. When we work at home, we're working at the pleasure of the organization still. We're still having the opportunity for the organization to give the terms and conditions of which that we're going to work at home. That being the case, it may be that they're asking you to talk about your results differently. Again, I hear a lot when I teach this that, we don't want to micromanage, and I agree. But I think it's not micromanaging if you share your contributions and your efforts because of the salary, because the organization has asked you to, and that's where you work. That's a business transaction. I'm giving a business transaction of my contributions. And I think one of the greatest things about this also is as you get used to having your documentation about your contributions, you're no longer getting a hall pass because you're in site. You're no longer because your car's in the parking lot or because you're at your desk that you get that hall pass. So you really are responsible as an employee to be a little bit more careful on making sure that people understand how your hours are spent. The other is your visibility, and I think it's very important to be available and visible. I'm not one that thinks that the minute someone writes an email that I need to respond immediately because I'm working remotely, but certainly within the frame that we've said that we're going to be responsible, it's there. I think many times people think if I don't see you, you're not working, and we're going to talk about how we do that with results rather than actually having someone in the office. So those become the price of admission. So I think once we have the price of admission, we begin to understand that, Jeremy will do one slide, and we begin to understand that another mindset is that we're in this together, and especially now in this crisis mode that we have a responsibility with our teams to our organization. It's not that I need to make you successful as a remote employee. It's that you need to help me do that as your manager, because we all have something that we need to do for our organization. And I think that if you have employees that are not able to make this transition, and they are well trained and they've got adequate places to work, and we're not in a crisis where you've got children at home, but in a more calm, remote workplace, I think you need to look at what contributions that's costing your team if you have people in your office just to be able to monitor them. So that is the remote employee. We'll look at the remote managers. And I think what's really interesting is there's this notion that as a remote manager, you have to have this different skill set. I know many people that are on this call, and you're already a remote manager. You've got this. You travel, you have multiple offices, you are in customer visits, you have multiple floors in your office. You do not have everyone in your site and in your voice control. So you're already managing remotely. You're setting the expectations and your teams are following you. The difference is now we have to just up it a little bit because we truly are not having any opportunity for that passing in the hallway at work, but it still is doing all of the things that you do today. It just makes us double down on our management efforts of being able to manage our team's work, make sure that we're managing by results and not hours, that we're very transparent in our communication, and that we have the ability to create stability and trust in our teams. And those are the things that you do every day. So it's just doing them a little bit differently, but not a different skill set, not a different knowledge. So with that, let's talk about how we do some of that. Some of it is defining the work, and I think this becomes really important. If you've not done this on site, that you have kind of, the work has been defined because you've had meetings and you've talked about it, but you haven't really defined objectives and goals, then maybe just do a week or a month or even a day. Since we're in crisis mode, you know, we don't have to do this on an annual basis. But essentially, it's just it's a great exercise to do in your organization anyway, because you really begin to look at inefficiencies, you begin to look at how things might be done better, but you basically define, this is what I want to do, this is my goal. And then with your teams, brainstorm all the tasks that have to happen in order to meet that goal. It's amazing that we think we're very unique in our work, but we have a lot of repeatable process. You have a lot of things that over time you would be able to get really good estimates around. If you are closing escrow files, there are certain things that happen in those escrow files repeatedly. And yes, there's always exceptions and things that take longer or take shorter, but given a good estimate, what is it that we're trying to do with the estimation of tasks? We're trying to say the things that you guys do today. You manage your staffing, you manage, so you have some ability to know how many, whatever it is that you're producing, whether it's escrow files or titles, that how many it takes to have in my staff in order to produce this amount of revenue, this amount of files. So you're doing that today. So we're going to brainstorm, say, here's our goal, here's the task, here's an estimated time. We many times list the risk and dependency, so we know this. We're going to just select an end date and then have a couple milestones that we're going to report on. And this gives even a day's basis, a week's basis, it gives somebody a plan they can begin to follow to be able to do that work.
Tammy, if I can ask, you obviously have a unique, gifted skill set to be excited by this and handle this, but I know it can often seem like a daunting thing too for someone to say, oh man, I got to evaluate all these things, and you know, I don't want it to feel like micromanaging or feel so robotic. But in reality, oftentimes I find when you actually go through the exercise, it doesn't take as long as we think. The mental obstacle is much greater than the actual result. So from your experience, how long does it really take to just start identifying these things and create a simple roadmap to at least begin this in the current remote environment?
A couple hours, because you're already doing the work successfully. I mean, this work is already being done, whether it's on site. And so to just run through a couple hours, because we're not trying to get analytics, we're just trying to get a baseline so that people can become comfortable that we can manage results rather than hours. And a couple hours would be a great investment to start working with your teams. They can basically tell you from beginning to end everything that needs to be done.
Yeah, awesome.
That's a great question. And so once we have that, we're going to begin to manage by results. And that's the whole purpose of doing that exercise, is to be able to understand, what do I want to task my individuals with, and how do I know whether we're meeting those goals or not. And, you know, at one time it used to be hours. We simply had productivity was just output divided by input, because we needed to be on site in manufacturing. And usually hours equated to a number of widgets that we could do. Today in knowledge workers, we're the output. It's because of our expertise and our knowledge that we're able to get the output. It's a little bit different as far as the measurement's concerned. So what we would be measuring now is whatever you would measure in your operation as the result. If it's a number of files completed, if it's a number of customers that we've called, whatever it is that you're trying to achieve, that you have some number in mind that you'll adjust and you'll change over a period of time. But I think if you have some number in mind, it gives you a comfort level that we are in fact meeting the results that you would expect when we're working from home. So that becomes managing by results. Let's flip one, Jeremy, please. And then we're going to do something that is the status and sharing. If I would have one thing that I would say that was the most successful, it was this, is that once we had some definition in as far as what we wanted to do, we basically created a status report. I don't like that because it tends to have bad connotations. It was really a work overview. And it said, last week you asked me to do 7 files and I was able to do 8 files, or I was able to do 6 files. It's what did I do last week to move the team forward? What am I going to do next week to move the team forward? And then what are my issues and risks? And that is it. We don't go into any long actions. It's a very quick bulleted list. And it's actually a great exercise to do at the end of the week for anybody who does business, leaders, anybody, to say, here's what I did last week, here's what my plans are next week. And then we also publish the results. So my philosophy is that by this time, we're no more with our teams than our individual performance. And so teams become team business. The performance of a team becomes that team's business. Never compensation, never personal issues that they would bring to the team. But if you are managing a team, it is really okay to publish the results of everyone, what we've done, how we've done it as individuals, how we've done as teams. And it allows 2 things to happen. One is that if I have to do this, I tend to be a little bit more accountable for my work. And secondarily, I'm now accountable to my team members, not just my manager, but my team members. And that makes a really great dynamic for performance of teams. The next would be having transparent communication. I think this is one of the areas that people struggle with, because if we're in the office and we have a chance to walk by someone, have a quick conversation, get a moment of clarity, do those things quickly, it becomes just a natural rhythm of us being in the office. Now we're going to have to take that and be very transparent in our conversations and our communications with our teams. There was one of the things that I found when I first came to Fidelity is it was a brand new team, and people are meaning makers. We want to make meaning out of our lives. And so if there were blanks in the communication, people wanted to fill that in. They would be talking to their team members and having spin of trying to fill in the blanks. So what I found is if we were able to do 1 meeting a week, or have some place that we always had the communication and we had clarity around that, they had one place they always went, they knew they were going to get the same communication across the team. It built a lot of trust. It built trust for my team to have trust in me. It built trust that we were all operating on the same page, that no one had information that others didn't have, which becomes very important in a remote environment. And then I think it also allowed me to realize that I need to be very, very thoughtful and intentional in my communication, and that one-off conversations tend to cause a lot of confusion in projects. So those were the transparent communication became very important. One part of the transparent communication that I will mention is, next slide please, Jeremy, is the fact that in an office environment, if you're having a difficult day or you're having a very rushed day, people know they can adjust to that because they see it. If you're having those days, and we still have those days working remotely, and now you're making a phone call, many times it feels very personal to that person that is now engaged because they don't have the context. So I found out as a manager, one of the things I had to do more often was stop and give context around phone calls, context around communication, which isn't as necessary if I'm sharing a physical space with someone. So I think that's really important, is to recognize that many times I will say, you know, I've had a really difficult morning. I'm coming into this call very, very neutral. But if I'm a little terse, if I'm a little short, you know, here's some difficulty that happened this morning. They may know the details, may not know the details, but it begins to set a context for how my interaction might be just a little bit different with them that particular day. So that becomes very important. And over communicate, make sure that as much as we always think that we communicate well, and then we find out that there's gaps in our communication, with remote teams, communicate often, frequently. One of the ways of communicating I think is important is, next slide please, is the monthly performance conversations. And this is one of the things that I don't like annual reviews. I think annual reviews always have the bias of what happened most recently, good or bad. And so many times I found that once we started these monthly conversations, it gave me a platform for a couple things. One is when you're remote, we need to make sure we're making small corrections and not large corrections. So you don't want much time to go by that if there's a problem. And secondarily, it also gave a really sanctioned platform for people to tell me how well they've done, what their contributions have been. And many people are hesitant to do that. That's uncomfortable for them. But if you build a platform wherein that's expected, I want to hear your highs of the month, I want to hear your lows of the month. It becomes a really nice thing for people to be able to share what their contributions have been. I did this individually, and then I do this as a team as well. So we would do it as a team to understand what we did well, what we need to improve on as a team. You look at our goals and objectives, see how they change, because they're always changing. I mean, establishing goals and objectives only gives you something to adjust from. They never stay as you define them. I mean, there's always changes. So I think it gives us that. Through virtual coffee breaks that are just an opportunity to do this with monthly conversations are great. I will add there are two other things that I found during this crisis mode as we've looked at that I thought were really great when it comes to making teams still feel very cohesive. One was they were actually volunteering together, meaning that if they were in different cities, they were taking the same undertaking. Perhaps it was a food bank, whatever it may be, and people would volunteer in your different cities, in your different neighborhoods, and then come back and kind of, as a team, report on that and report on an experience and how that happened. And then the last one that I thought was very clever, again, for cohesiveness, was they had a team lunch by Zoom or GoToWebinar. And essentially, you fixed your favorite lunch, you shared that recipe. And I mean, it went from things I could never fix to, a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, but you fixed it. And then we all come in, and for 1 hour, we just talk about what's happening in our lives, not what's happening at work, but just what's happening in our lives, and have that chance to connect again as a team. So those become some hints that could happen now and then happen in the future. And the last slide that I have on this is really about promoting your teams. One of the things that I think we fear as remote managers as well as remote teams is that we're out of sight, out of mind. When I recently went to a job, one of the things that they said is, we don't have remote teams. And I said, if you would give us 6 months to prove their contributions, I think that you would find that you get a really great opportunity to have employees that are not just in your town. They can be across the United States, and for what you're looking for, there's a precise skill set. And one of the ways that we do that is many times remote teams and remote employees have gotten kind of a bad rap because maybe they are working, but they're not sharing they're working. So when we do team contributions, it's really important to do some type of an executive summary, at least on a monthly basis, if not a weekly basis. And again, nothing complicated, a few bullets that just basically says, here's where our objectives for this month, and here's what the team did, and show how we're giving contributions to the organization, how we're maintaining our sight on organizational goals, and how our performance is helping the organization. That becomes really important when you've got teams that are not seen. You don't want them to be out of mind. So that becomes the framework, and then we're going to, I'll turn it back over to Andrew, and then we've got some things in the end that will tie framework and crisis and action plans together.
Yeah, so right now I just recommend everyone take a deep breath, just inhale and exhale, because Tammy and myself, right, there's been 12 years plus of remote experience creating this, and it can feel like a lot to digest and like a little bit overwhelming of, man, I'm already having to readjust how I'm doing all this. Now I have this huge outline and plan, and it is a la carte. It's some right now and some for you to implement down the road, not all right now. Don't be overwhelmed by that. And Tammy really helps set the stage for what makes up a great recipe to be successful in creating a remote team. And if she spelled out that recipe, I want to do some of the shopping and help find the best ingredients for success. And this is the type of shopping I like, systems and technology. Because if I've learned anything in the COVID lockdown, it's that I really don't like grocery shopping. However, it is better than being the at-home school teacher, which is the job my wife has right now. So, and no matter what those systems are, the most important factors are, like Tammy talked about, communication and then convenience. So whether fully remote, fully on-site, or more likely something in between, you have to be able to connect teams and customers with clarity to succeed. And further, we're always now going to be in this struggle for convenience and efficiency around security, both physical and digital, without compromising any sort of safety. So on the short term, what this looks like, I believe, has been the technology reaction. So what I can safely assume now is that being a month into this lockdown, everyone has leveraged or used a new software or a new system. And this probably doesn't even make up a handful of ones. So, if you're still paying attention at your computer, I'd say just type in the chat, the best new software you've tried. And I think that's a beautiful thing, is that despite this, we've been forced to try new software and to give the new thought to ways we're going to work. On the flip side, I know there's been a lot of tech fatigue that's come out of this. We are a problem-solving industry, and I believe we've reacted well, but I also know that screen fatigue is a real thing. It's another day, another Zoom, just another article about it all. But I think if we can look past that, if we can confront those brutal facts, I don't want us to miss an opportunity that exists, right? There's the famous Winston Churchill quote, to never let a good crisis go to waste. And this isn't to diminish the sorrow of the present or seem tone deaf, but as a leader, it encourages me that good will come out of it. And this may be the best time to reorient the way of thinking and the new innovations. So I believe it was the last week's webinar on some of those, the advocacy virtual summit. And, people were talking about how, we've talked about using this software for, months or years now, and we never did. And now we've been forced to, and we're never going back. I've worked with clients all across the country, been involved in multiple Alta events, and been able to meet companies and teams of all different sizes, cultures, locations. And I've observed a few very key traits that exist in this industry. And one of the most profound ones is the relentless ability to work hard and overcome any obstacle. And I think this industry does that well. But on the flip side, it can also create stubborn loyalty. So I am amazed at the poor software and the bad features that employees will work around in a company, because that's just the way we've always done it. And I care too much about your time. And I think in this lockdown, we're realizing, as easy it is to lose track of time and forget what day it is and what time it is, how precious our time is. So as we look at various solutions, I think it's going to be important to look at how these fit into a long-term model as well, and assess what software is going to maximize our time and what apps we can use. So as we start digging in now to some of the more technical features, when we're looking at all this software, we get past the reaction and we want to evaluate what's really going to work for us. Ask the right questions. What bottleneck is it replacing? What opportunity is it helping to capture? Right? Really, it's either something is either solving a problem or it's enabling a new opportunity. And sometimes we have to piece together things. There's no one size fits all model. Some people prefer dark chocolate over milk chocolate. Some crazy people like walnuts in their brownies instead of more chocolate chips. I'll never understand that. But everyone's going to have a different system, and it's important to just identify what that is. And this is much a reminder for me, as I'm sure some others, avoid analysis paralysis. I am a perfectionist and detail oriented, so I want to find the perfect solution, which can sometimes get in the way of just finding progress in a solution. The last one, keep a record of the pros and cons. This seems simple, but just like common sense isn't common, simple isn't always as easy as it sounds. But when you start a new software, there's excitement and adjustment. And then in the moment, you recognize, oh, I like this, or I wish it just did this. And we will document those pros and cons, because once we get out of the rush, it allows us to step back and say, okay, we need to find something that can handle these other three parts. Or this really worked well here, and is there another software we can add in? So there's just a few things to keep in mind as we look at ways to enhance team communication and customer communication. So This slide really just envision, right? The left half is apps more focused on team communication, right side more customer communication, and some that sort of float in between. So you may recognize some of these, but there's a few here that really promote collaboration, and I'm talking obviously outside of a workflow and a title production system. But as Tammy talked about, this results-oriented work environment, right? The row model where you're focused on results. It's if you live out of your inbox, you need to use a different system to track results, to share goals. So Asana, Trello, ways to just share tasks across team. Whether you're a Google or Microsoft fan, I won't get into the argument about which is better right now. Jive, right? Your customers are still going to want to call you and contact you. So do you have VoIP phones set up? Do they forward to your employees' cell phones, with apps and forwarding? They still need to get a hold of you. The integrations directly into systems like a Close Simple to communicate with customers proactively, to take that burden off of you. The social media side of Bo Digital, there's so many ways to enhance communication right now. And the hard part is customers are everywhere. So we have to figure out amidst this how to stay organized with it. Doodle is one of my favorites, especially now. You're going to be coordinating meetings with people across time zones, across school schedules. So you can send a list of 5 open times and someone can select their best one. Another person can select their best times, and it will aggregate and give you the 3 best meeting times that work for everyone. So you're not wasting time sending emails back and forth of, hey, I can do 1 p.m. I can do 1:30. What about this person? And it just saves so much time and effort. Slack, allows you to integrate end users as well as internal teams. But really the most important aspect is just saying, where is our team going to live? And how are we going to communicate with each other in that way? Some people want to use text message, some people will use Google Hangout, but it's really saying what's going to be our model of communication, and then stay consistent with it and experiment with it all. Fail fast, try it. Sadly, you have that promotion now. You are a tech researcher and a learner having to implement new solutions. And I realize I might be a contradiction to this, because in my job, we work with so many different clients where we are working in their system. So I don't have just one ideal model, as much as I wish I did at times, but I work in every title production software. I have remote PCs because we all work on Macs, but this industry works mostly in PCs. So I've used every program out there, and this is just a starting list. We can have a follow-up conversation to really dive deep. But before we get too granular on some other softwares and ways to dive into it, we can't forget about home security, especially now that we're stuck at home for the most part. And even as that changes, there's a few just easy wins to take advantage of. Again, the simple things aren't always so simple. And the first is just look at your Wi-Fi router. It's so easy to plug and play when we get home, turn it on, we have Wi-Fi. But just simple steps that should be default, but you never want to assume. Google your provider that you have, make sure you have the admin password, change the admin password, control it, keep people, AKA kids, out. The hardest thing for me working from home is really just been figuring out distractions. Partly my own fault of like, oh, I'm home, I can work on this project, or I kind of want to get this done, versus also, kids and family who now, oh, he's home, he must not be working, it's free time, so I can just open the door and come in. So I've created door hangers. We'll see how well they work for this call, but they're attached as handouts too, in case you want to edit them, customize them, make your own fun ones. I found that the working on emails one actually works the best because no one wants to come in and give me like a neck rub or a shoulder massage. But those are a couple simple things. Most importantly though, passwords. This is something I weirdly am passionate about just because I am so lazy. All right, my laziness is what drives productivity and efficiency, because I don't want to waste time doing things. But I also know from a security standpoint, using complex passwords is so hard, because how are you supposed to remember this, right? The humor of 8 to 16 characters, and it has to have this, and it can't be the same one, it can't match your user ID. So if you walk away with one thing today, which I hope there will be more things than just that. Find a password manager. LastPass and 1Password, I hope your organizations and your IT teams approve that and can work with it, because not only does it allow you to create secure passwords, you don't have to remember all of them. You can remember 1Password, and then it can autofill. It will give you a password score. It will go through every website you have and tell you how secure it is if you need to change it. It also has two-factor authentication built in. So for websites that allow it, you can add that extra level of security. And I think we'll actually be more secure working from home than we are at the office, because at an office, we kind of take it for granted. We feel secure within the systems we have and all the challenges with wire fraud and security measures we've implemented that we almost take it for granted sometimes. I think working from home, we can be more secure now, knowing we have to be intentional with it. So just next slide is a quick little screenshot of how a 1Password or a LastPass works, right? There's just a little plugin in the browser in the top of your phone, your computer, whatever you use, that can autofill a website. It can activate two-factor authentication. It can tell you if you have weak passwords. It can tell you if you're using the same password on multiple websites, which is, a real challenge and something to avoid. It just simplifies the annoyance of security. And I found in security, if you are too secure, you're going to end up being just as a threat as anything, because you're not going to want to follow it, because it's a bottleneck. No one wants to deal with password resets and having to reset it because they forgot it. So get 1Password, get LastPass. If you don't have it, you will thank me later, I promise. Last thing, expect it. Expect there to be threats, be cautious. This is an email I shared with my team on, it looked like our IT department was sending out an email of an issue happening with a VPN. Well, for the most part, I am IT, so I know that this is not a real thing, but they even masked it so it comes from a dbello.com domain. The URL looks like it's our URL, but when you hover over it, you clearly see it's going to some random website. So, I always say be cautious. And one reason I like Max is I can preview all this stuff without having to actually open it. It's a little bit more safer and secure. So just encourage your team to be cautious, especially when you're handling different, closings and escrows and funds and wiring. There's just so much to be careful of. So a couple other best practices on that now is the personal efficiency drives team efficiency. So if Tammy talked about the larger scope of teams, this is the nerdy stuff I really like, because like I said earlier, we only get 24 hours in a day, and the way we use our time is so critical and so important. So I want to look at the ways that we can be efficient in our personal workspace to lead by example for other team members and to set employees up to win as we find incremental progress. So the efficiency toolbox, everyone's going to have a little bit of a different one. And right now, this is really kind of what mine looks like on a day-to-day basis. And I actually keep this image as Jeremy goes to the next slide here. I think we're having a little delay. I know, man, you got to applaud Jeremy, how hard he works to get all this stuff coordinated. It's not an easy job.
True. Absolutely.
So I keep this on my desktop just as a reminder of, oh yeah, this is the system I've tried to create and follow, because there's so many distractions and so many things going on that it helps just remind me to, oh yeah, I'm walking this process. This is my organization, which can seem complicated, but there's systems to it. I live in Apple Mail. Zendesk helps manage customer issues. Asana is team and productivity, goals. TimeCamp is a weird one. I like to track my time, not so much from a micromanaging standpoint, but if I don't and our team doesn't, it's easy to look back and lose sight of what did we do? And Tammy talked about identifying what are your goals and objectives, what do you want to accomplish, and doing that is important, but also I want to know how efficient is it? Are there bottlenecks happening that I'm not seeing? And when you are working remotely, it's easy to lose sight of those things, but I want to do it for sake of freeing up time. That's my goal. It's not to micromanage. It's not to tell people they have to do it a certain way, but it's to say, is there a chance to free up time and margin for them? So this is my toolbox, and I want to walk away in this section with some best practices on getting practical. I know there's been zillions of articles on working from home and other things like that, but I think there's 5 really practical ways to share with team members, implement for yourself that have helped me is, picking where I want to work. I've always said, oh man, I can work from anywhere, which also means I can work from anywhere. And when you add, kids and family, or even if you're single and at home and loving it, it's still a threat to always work all the time. So I think it's important to have that spot where you're going to work. Build a new commute, right? If you're someone who listened to audiobooks and caught up with people on the phone when you were driving to and from work, you can't just get rid of that and assume you're going to feel just as excited and motivated and refreshed. So I call this that bite of ginger between sushi bites. You have to figure out ways to kind of just refresh. Reset expectations. I think as a leader and manager, this is huge because the speed at which we work, the clarity of it all, it is a huge adjustment. We didn't have time to prepare for this, which is sometimes is a good thing, but we have to reset our expectations as schools are shut down and we're all at home and we can't get things done as efficiently as we used to. Batch time and activities, again, back to time tracking. And I realize if you're in a customer-oriented role, you can't always just shut off email for 3 hours and say, I'm going to work on this one big project. But if you can organize similar activities, it'll just help limit distractions, even batching social media or reading articles. Otherwise, I'll get consumed with just the news, which is overwhelming. But I'm going to give myself 30 minutes to just look at these news articles. And then something my wife thinks is a valuable skill of my productivity that I've always done is I start well by ending well. At the end of every day, I will look for my big 3 the next day, because again, that laziness and some of that exhaustion, when I wake up, I don't want to have to think about what I need to do. I want to already have it planned out. So yes, there's going to be fires that pop up, but I want to know going into the next day, give my mind some peace to enjoy the evening, know what I'm going to do the following day. So I think just that simple step goes a long way. And as we take all these tools now, we'll look at a quick action plan for going from crisis to remote working, and I'll hand it back to Tammy for here.
Great. We're gonna we'll do this quickly because I know we're running out of time. Jeremy, if you'll flip to the next slide, please. We're gonna look at, here's just some things that you can do today. Rather than taking on the whole framework, just get deliverables for today. It's a great time to do stand-up calls because we're not traveling. You can actually get calls together in a 24-hour period rather than 3 weeks. I think it's to allow for flexibility right now. Find when individuals can be most productive, and especially if they've got children at home. Perhaps it's the early morning and the evening, and that it's not the 8 to 5, and we still can make that work. I think end of the day reports can work very well in a short term if you're trying to make this adjustment. And then just support and trust. Don't micromanage it. I think that you have great employees. You've trained them well. As soon as they get their footing at home, they're going to be able to perform well. So the last thing I'll share is, Jeremy, the next slide, which is Andrew and I put together, and this is just a snapshot. It's an action plan, and it's basically all the things that we covered today. Some of this you can take in the short term. Some of it can be longer term. Some of it may never fit your culture, and you never want to use it. So it is the a la carte, and this is available for you as far as a handout is concerned, so that you can take the things that we did today, and it makes it just real action steps. And I guess, Jeremy, we are almost out of time for questions, and I know you're going to give our email addresses at the end. Any questions that we can't answer today, I am available and more than happy to take those by email.
Yeah, thank you, Tammy and Andrew. Some common questions that came in. Webinar is recorded. It will be archived on the Alta website at alta.org/webinars. Everyone will also get a link to the recording as well. And copy of the presentation can be downloaded from the handouts section. It will also be uploaded to the website. So when you go there and want to view the recording, you can access a copy of the presentation there as well. And as Tammy said, we'll hold a little bit of time here. We've got about 5 minutes or so, and I'm sure people have closings to tend to or other work of running your business. Some of the common platforms, Andrew, people use Teams, Zoom. I think one of the things that people need to be aware of, like using Microsoft Teams, if you want to communicate with your customers, as you mentioned, they'll have to be on Microsoft as well. Otherwise, Microsoft is going to be a good option there. Probably using Zoom for conversations with other people, maybe a lot of happy hours. I don't know. So we'll get into some questions here, maybe a little just rapid response here, and see how many we can get through. Any input on how to manage someone who's working more than 40 hours? Tammy, you talked about 40 hours is kind of the guidepost. What about someone who's just working crazy hours? How do you manage them?
And I think it's really tough because that really is one of the problems with working remotely, is the fact that your work is always with you. And I think it's establishing a routine, getting them to establish a routine, which means that there's an end of the day routine, as Andrew talked about. You have a beginning of the day, end of the day routine is the only suggestion that I can give you, because it can really lead to burnout.
Yeah. With now that everyone's working remotely and you're not really interacting with people, how do you manage emotions? How do you manage jealousy or envy of people who are now working remotely? Is it that just more of the communication and staying in touch with people more often?
Yeah, I think it's having to have more blunt conversations. I think the biggest fear and hesitation of doing remote before this was not knowing how it would affect culture. I mean, even Alta for a long time, right, is trying to instill values to all the members. Is how do you create your values as a company? So like our culture has been such a huge aspect of the ways we've been trying to grow organizations and retain talent and recruit for new talent, that mixing remote in was always a fear of, well, is it going to upset this person now? But all of a sudden that concern's been thrown away because we've had to be. So it's a little bit easier to have that conversation now because there's already the elephant in the room, so you can't hide from it. And I think it's just having to, like even Tammy said, add context to conversations. You just have to kind of go in saying, hey, am I misreading something here? How are you feeling about this? And just kind of let it be communicated and shared, because you can't avoid it.
Yeah, that was a question from Joe, who's basically wondering what kind of psychology do we need to be implementing in our virtual workplace now. How about having Karen was wondering about a little bit of grace toward the employees who may be struggling. Should a manager be a little bit more open-minded to someone who might not be producing as well at home? Any thoughts there, Tammy?
I think that's absolutely true. I don't have children at home. I cannot imagine the people that are homeschooling, having children, having spouses now that are working from home, and do all of that and expect to have the same efficiency at the office. So I think, grace and patience, and, working from home takes a period of time and commitment, even under the best of circumstances. So I think it having grace and patience and recognizing that that we will find our footing in this is absolutely imperative.
Yeah, if there's ever been a better time to allow and expect people to need some adjustment or some extended grace, it's now. And I think there's, as a leader, there's no better opportunity than to do that and show that. And in return, I think the long-term, loyalty and team building will come out of it in a great way. But it's just recognizing, hey, what can I take off your plate and shift, and to remove or just simplify, what maybe they just need the simple objectives like Tammy talked about, just worry about these things. Maybe it's not as time sensitive, so they can do it at different hours of the day because they have flexibility, but they don't have rigidity. So I think there's a few different ways to navigate that.
Andrew, maybe you could touch on this a little bit. You mentioned the LastPass. What was the other one that was on the slide? iPass or
one password. So I use both for a couple different organizations that we're involved with, and both work across all platforms, Mac, PC, all devices. So I probably lean a little bit more LastPass, but I'm just more familiar with it, so I might be slightly biased.
Now, how do those work? Are they subscriptions, or do you just, log in and get access?
They have subscription models from, family and individual to business and enterprise, where your IT team can spec out all the necessary security elements. They can share different folders with different teams and groups, so you can segregate privacy and restrictions as needed.
Would this be a kind of another follow-up, and it kind of leads into overall expenses? Would this be an expense that an employer might want to consider, covering for the employee?
Oh, big time. Because I don't have to get emails asking, oh, wait, what's this password? Or sometimes an account comes to my email, but I'm not the one using it for, if there's like an organizational login for something. So I'm not having to deal with extra emails to do with it because it's in a shared password account that they have access to that website for. So I think we talk about ROI and cost, which we didn't get a ton into, but typically in a tech standpoint and efficiency standpoint, the cost of things, the ROI can be hard to track because you're talking about people's time or a certain result, but the ROI far outweighs the cost.
A couple other ones that people suggested. Cynthia uses Dashlane, and Alberta recommended RoboForm. We are a couple minutes over, actually. So, but maybe just one or two questions more here, and we'll wrap up. Maybe if you guys could expound a little bit further on the types of expenses that a employer may want to consider covering. Internet.
I think there's a lot of difference that you can do with that. Some actually have an office in a box where they give some type of a chair, a desk, et cetera, to people who don't have it, all the way to, covering expenses. And I think that's just entirely up to the organization, what type of rules and regulations they would like to put around their expenses, as well as around their terms and conditions of having a remote workforce.
Yeah, it's, short term it's unique because, we kind of just purged our office and said, take whatever you need home, screens, monitors, etc. But when you bring it back to a hybrid, someone's going to be in the office once a week, at home 4 days a week, how do you blend that? And if it's something they're already paying for, it's probably a little easier to buy some time on saying, okay, they already have internet at home. That's not an added burden. But now if I'm asking them to do A, B, C, and D, and they don't have that, what do I need to consider? And I know cost is a tricky subject, right now, bottom lines across the board, but I think the more you can just be generous, that will produce even more fruit and results down the road.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Tammy and Andrew. Again, the last slide on the presentation are their emails, so if you want to reach out directly, please feel free to do so. Again, as a reminder, if you missed today's parts of today's presentation, or you think others in the office would benefit, recording the presentation will be available at alta.org/webinars. You also get an email with a link to the recording. Looking ahead to next month, we'll offer our second compliance webinar. This presentation will discuss industry's top claims, and we're going to modify it to talk about the potential rise of client claims stemming from COVID. Before wrapping up, on your screen here, you'll see an image. I was hoping to share the video live the video we just produced, but having some trouble with the audio. So just recommend if you go to alta.org, you can hear on the homepage. But at the start of this year, we were developing we're developing a Tell Our Story campaign to help influencers, government stakeholders, consumers, understand how title professionals facilitate real estate transactions, protect property rights. And part of the story is focusing on you guys, the people in the industry, and what you all do in your communities. Well, and then COVID hit. So we quickly decided to use some of the material that we've collected to create a video that really just showcases the volunteerism and innovation efforts that you all are doing in response to the pandemic. So the video was just posted Monday, so you're kind of getting a sneak exclusive look at it. So I hope you enjoy it. Please share it with others. Let's really elevate and showcase what this industry is all about. Always, not just during a time of crisis. We've also seen members across the country delivering, for people and their organizations. whether it's making masks, donating money to local restaurants, helping the homeless. We launched a good deeds campaign last month, and we've been sharing those stories. So on your screen there, you can see ways you can send that information to us. We'll share it on our blog and social media. And if you do so, share your stories on social media. Tag us as well. You also may be wondering about future Alta events. The big one, Alta One, coming up in New York. We're still weighing our options, but we expect to make a decision in the next few weeks. While the where and how is still to be decided, there will be some virtual component. So we'll be staying in touch with you guys to let you know about that. Obviously, our number one priority is everyone's safety. In the meantime, you can always stay connected with our various online options and publications. Just know that Alta is always here to help you, guide you through this. A lot of information about COVID can be found on Alta's website. Lots of resources there to go through and help you out. And with that will bring us to the conclusion of today's presentation. To wrap up, we do need to thank FNF Family of Companies once again for sponsoring our Title Topics webinars. Take care, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Hi, thank you.
See ya.